My name is Avery Collins. I'm 29 years old. And 2 years ago, I discovered that the reason I couldn't get out of bed most mornings, the reason my hands shook at work, the reason I cried in parking lots and forgot conversations I'd had hours earlier, was that my mother had been putting medication in my food. Not to hurt me. That's the part I have had to sit with for a very long time. She genuinely believed she was helping. I want to start at the beginning because the beginning matters more than people might expect. This isn't a story that starts with a villain. It starts with a mother who loved her daughter so much that she lost track of where her love ended and her control began. My mom, Linda, raised me alone from the time I was 4. My father left not dramatically, not with an affair or a scene, just quietly, the way some people leave when they realize the life they've built doesn't fit the person they actually are. He moved to Seattle, started over, sent child support reliably and birthday cards occasionally, and was mostly absent in the ways that matter when you're a child. Linda filled that space entirely. She was present in the complete, consuming way of a single parent who has decided that her child's well-being is her primary project. She came to everything, every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference. She knew my friends' names, their parents' names, what was happening in my social life with a level of detail that I found embarrassing as a teenager, and that I now understand was her way of making sure nothing bad could reach me without her knowing about it. She was not a bad mother. I want to be clear about that because what she did was wrong in ways I am still working through, but she was not a bad mother. She was a frightened one. She had watched the person she loved most leave without warning when I was 4, and somewhere in the years that followed she had built a kind of vigilance around me that had no natural upper limit. I moved out at 22, to an apartment 20 minutes from her house in Columbus. I had a job in healthcare billing, an entry-level position that paid enough to cover rent and not much else. And I was genuinely happy in the particular way of someone living independently for the first time, not comfortable exactly, but free in a way that felt important. Linda called every day, sometimes twice. She came over unannounced often enough that I eventually gave her a key, because it was easier than the alternative of her standing in the hallway waiting for me to answer the door after 4 unanswered texts. I loved her. I was also, slowly, beginning to understand the difference between being loved and being monitored. The dinners started about 8 months after I moved out. She began coming over on Sunday evenings to cook for me. It was, on its surface, generous. She would bring groceries, make a full meal, leave portions I could eat through the week. I worked long hours and cooked badly, and the arrangement was genuinely convenient. I looked forward to Sundays. They were the most uncomplicated part of our relationship. I didn't start feeling wrong until about 6 months into the Sunday dinners. It's difficult to describe precisely because nothing was dramatic or sudden. It was more like a gradual dimming, a tiredness that didn't respond to sleep, a flattening of my emotional range that made things I used to care about feel slightly distant, like watching my own life through glass. I had occasional dizziness. My appetite was unpredictable. I had a persistent low-grade headache that came and went without clear cause. I told my primary care doctor about the fatigue. She ran basic blood work, thyroid, iron, vitamin D, everything. She suggested I might be dealing with burnout, that I should try to reduce stress and prioritize sleep. I followed her advice and felt no better. I told Linda about the fatigue. She said she was worried, that she had noticed I seemed low, that she thought I might be depressed. The word depressed landed in a specific way that I registered and then set aside. My mother had used that word about me periodically throughout my 20s, not as a clinical observation, but as a kind of general concern, a way of naming what she saw as my insufficiency in meeting life with the energy and positivity she felt I should have. I had learned to hear it as code for something else, for her worry about me rather than as an accurate description of my mental state. What I didn't know at the time was that Linda had been doing her own research. During those months when I was describing my symptoms to her, she had been reading extensively about depression and anxiety, and what she called high-functioning emotional struggles. She had researched antidepressants with the thoroughness of someone who approaches problems as things to be solved. She had spoken to a friend whose adult daughter had been prescribed sertraline, and had, according to Linda's account of this conversation, improved dramatically. She had also, at some point that I cannot precisely identify, obtained sertraline. I don't know how. This is one of the details I never fully resolved, whether she got it through someone with a prescription, whether there was some other channel I haven't been able to trace. What I know is that she had it, and that she had read enough about it to believe, genuinely and completely, that it would help me, and that the most efficient way to help me was to make sure I was taking it whether I had decided to or not. She was putting it in the food she brought on Sunday evenings. I found this out on a Thursday in March, almost 2 years after the Sunday dinners began. My company changed insurance providers that year, which meant I needed to establish care with a new primary care physician. The new doctor, a woman named Dr. Reyes who had a manner of quiet, thorough attention that I appreciated immediately, asked me during our first appointment to describe any symptoms I'd been experiencing. I told her about the fatigue, the flattening, the headaches, the hands that shook sometimes in the morning. She asked how long this had been going on. I told her roughly a year and a half, maybe closer to 2 years. She asked whether I had been tested for anything beyond the standard panel. I said my previous doctor had run basic blood work. Dr. Reyes said she'd like to run a broader panel, including what she called a comprehensive metabolic screen and a toxicology component she used as a baseline for new patients, particularly those presenting with unexplained multisystem symptoms. I said that was fine. Reyes called me directly rather than posting them to the patient portal. She asked if I had a few minutes to talk. Her voice was careful in a way that made me sit down before she said anything substantive. She told me my blood work showed the presence of sertraline at a consistent therapeutic level. I told her I wasn't taking sertraline. She was quiet for a moment. She asked me to confirm had I ever been prescribed sertraline or any SRI by any provider. Had I taken any supplements or over-the-counter medications that might contain such a compound? I told her no. Clearly, unambiguously no. She said she wanted me to come in to discuss the results in person and that she had some additional questions she needed to ask me carefully. I drove to her office the following morning in a state I can only describe as a particular kind of suspended disbelief. The feeling of a fact that your mind has registered, but that hasn't yet fully landed in your body, like standing at the top of a very high place and not yet feeling afraid. Dr. Reyes was thorough and gentle. She explained what the presence of sertraline at therapeutic levels in my blood work meant, that I had been taking the medication consistently enough, and at sufficient dosage, for it to register clearly. That the symptoms I'd been describing, the fatigue, the emotional flattening, the physical side effects, were consistent with the effects of sertraline in someone who had not been assessed for it, whose dosage had not been calibrated by a physician, and who had not consented. She asked me very carefully whether I had any idea how the medication might have entered my system. I thought about Sunday dinners. I thought about my mother, who showed up every week with groceries and love and food she cooked herself and portioned into containers I ate from throughout the week. I thought about how the symptoms had started approximately 6 months after the Sunday dinners began and had been consistent ever since. I said I thought I might know, Dr. Reyes referred me to a patient advocate within the practice who helped me understand my options and my rights. She documented everything carefully: the test results, my account of the timeline, my statement that I had not been prescribed or knowingly taken any such medication. She was, throughout this conversation, professional and precise, and also, I could tell, genuinely troubled by what she was hearing. I drove home from that appointment and sat in my car. I need to explain what I felt during that hour, because I think it would be easy to assume that what I felt was primarily rage. And while rage was there, it was not the first thing or the largest thing. The first thing was something closer to vertigo, the particular dizziness of realizing that your perception of your own life for the past 2 years has been built on something false. Every conversation I'd had during that time, every difficult day I'd attributed to burnout or personality or circumstance, every moment I'd wondered if something was fundamentally wrong with me, all of it reframed in a single phone call. I had not been falling apart. I had been medicated without my knowledge or consent. I called my aunt, my father's sister, Carol, who had maintained a relationship with me through my parents' separation and who I trusted in a way I didn't fully trust anyone on my mother's side. I told her what Dr. Reyes had found. I told her my theory about the Sunday dinners. I asked her what she thought I should do. Carol was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, "Avery, what your mother did, regardless of why she did it, is a crime." I had not let my... Hearing it from someone else made it real in a way I hadn't been ready for. Carol asked me what I wanted to happen. Not what I should do legally, not what was technically correct, what I, Avery, actually wanted. I said I didn't know, and then I said I want to understand why. I went to my mother's house the following Saturday. I had not told her what Dr. Reyes had found. I had not told anyone except Carol. I sat down at her kitchen table, the same kitchen where she had made so many of the meals I'd eaten over the past 2 years, and I told her what the blood work had shown. Linda's face did something I had never seen it do before. It didn't show guilt exactly, not in the way I might have expected. It showed something more complicated, a kind of careful, bracing quality, like someone who has been carrying a secret and is simultaneously relieved and terrified that it's over. "I was trying to help you," she said. "You were struggling, you wouldn't get help yourself, I didn't know what else to do. Mom, you put medication in my food without telling me. I researched it, I knew it would be safe, I knew the dosage was appropriate, you wouldn't have agreed to take it if I'd asked, you would have said you didn't need it. I might have said that, or I might have talked to a doctor and made an informed decision. That was my choice to make. You weren't making any choices, she said, and there was a frustration in her voice that I hadn't expected, not quite defensiveness, but something close to it. You were just suffering and you weren't doing anything about it, and I was watching you and I couldn't stand it. I sat with that for a moment. Did it help? I asked. Did you think it was helping? She looked at me for a long moment. You seemed better, she said quietly. After a few months, you seemed less flat. I thought it was working. The particular cruelty of this, that the medication she gave me without consent may have, in some measure, done what she intended it to do, is something I have had to process in therapy over many months, with a therapist I chose myself, whose treatment plan I participated in designing, whose recommendations I was free to accept or refuse. I did not immediately report what had happened to the police. I thought about it for 3 weeks, during which I stopped the Sunday dinners, stopped answering calls from Linda, and spent a significant amount of time in conversation with Dr. Reyes, with Carol, and eventually with an attorney named James Whitfield who specialized in personal injury and medical cases. James told me what I already suspected, that what Linda had done constituted criminal poisoning under Ohio law, regardless of intent. That administering any substance to a person without their knowledge or consent, even illegal medication at a therapeutic dose, was a criminal act. That I had both the right to file a criminal complaint and to pursue civil action for the harm caused, 2 years of symptoms, a medical record documenting the presence of an unprescribed medication, documentation of the effects on my work and daily functioning. I asked him what happened to people who were convicted of some. He told me honestly that cases involving family members, benign intent, and no physical injury were handled differently than cases involving malice. That Linda would likely face criminal charges, but that her sentence, if convicted, would probably involve probation, mandatory psychiatric evaluation, possibly community service. That prison was unlikely given the circumstances. I asked him if there was a way to pursue accountability that didn't involve his mother going through a criminal prosecution. He said there were other options. A civil suit, a formal agreement requiring Linda to undergo therapy and cease any similar behavior, documented and enforceable. A protective order limiting her access to me if I wanted distance without criminal consequences. I sat with all of that for another week. What I decided was this. I filed a formal report with the Columbus Police Department because I believed that what Linda had done needed to be on record regardless of how the case proceeded. I wanted there to be documentation, official and permanent, that this had happened, that a woman had medicated her adult daughter for 2 years without consent, and that the daughter had not simply absorbed that fact quietly and moved on. I also told Linda through James that I would not be pushing for criminal prosecution if she agreed to specific conditions: a full psychiatric evaluation, ongoing therapy with a provider she did not choose herself, no contact with me for 6 months while I decided what our relationship looked like going forward, and a signed legal acknowledgement of what she had done and why it was wrong. Linda agreed to all of it. I don't know exactly what the psychiatric. I know she entered therapy because her therapist's office confirmed she had established care, which was one of the conditions. I know she completed the 6 months of no contact because I tracked the date carefully. At the end of those 6 months, Linda sent me a letter. Not an email, a physical letter, handwritten, 6 pages. She described in more detail than I had heard before what those 2 years had looked like from her side, the fear she'd felt watching me struggle. The research she'd done, which she now understood had been a way of convincing herself she was being responsible rather than actually being responsible. The moment she'd first put the medication in food, how she told herself it was temporary, just until I stabilized, just for a few weeks, and how the weeks had become months, and the months had become 2 years of a secret that had grown beyond anything she'd originally intended. She wrote about her own history with anxiety, which I had not fully understood before, a history of feeling out of control, of the people she loved being beyond her reach, of a fear so large and so old that she had stopped being able to identify where it ended and where her actions began. She did not ask me to forgive her. She said she understood if I couldn't. She said she was telling me all of it because she thought I deserved the complete picture rather than the part she was comfortable sharing. I read that letter 4 times over 2 days. Then I called her. We talked for almost 3 hours. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had, not comfortable, not clean, but real in a way that nothing between us had quite been before, because for the first time we were talking about the actual thing rather than the surface of it. I told her that what she had done had cost me 2 years of understanding my own mind, that I had spent that time believing something was fundamentally wrong with me when the problem was something being done to me, that the loss of those 2 years, of self-understanding, of clarity, of the experience of my own unmediated consciousness, was not something I could simply accept and move past as though it were a misunderstanding rather than a harm. She listened to all of it without arguing or defending. That was new. She said she knew. She said she was sorry in a way that meant something different than the apology she had offered earlier, less explanatory, more willing to simply sit in the fact of having caused damage rather than immediately trying to explain it away. I do not have a clean resolution to offer here. Linda and I are in contact again, carefully, with a structure that is different from anything that existed before, boundaries that are explicit rather than assumed, communication that I control the pace of, an understanding between us that is clearer and harder and more honest than the relationship we had before any of this happened. I still have the blood work results saved in a folder on my laptop alongside James's correspondence and Dr. Ray's documentation. I keep them the way I understand. Now you have to keep records of things that happened, particularly things that someone might later prefer to remember differently. The Sunday dinners are over. I cook for myself now badly, the way I always did. I am learning what my own mind feels like when it belongs entirely to me. I am 29 years old. I have one kidney's worth of understanding about how far a parent's love can travel past the border of what it has any right to do. And I have learned something I carry with me now into every relationship that matters, that love without consent is not love. It is control wearing love's clothing. And the difference between them, when you finally see it clearly, is everything. There is one more thing I want to say, something I held back from including earlier because I wasn't sure it was mine to share, but which I've decided matters enough to tell. About 4 months after Linda and I re-established contact, I got a message through a mutual acquaintance from a woman named Deanna, who had been Linda's closest friend for almost 15 years. Deanna said she'd heard something had happened between us, that she was aware there had been a serious situation, and that she had something she thought I should know. We met for coffee on a Tuesday afternoon. Deanna told me that Linda had confided in her approximately 14 months into the 2 years, had told her, in a moment of what Deanna described as visible distress, that she had been adding something to my food when she visited, that she was worried it had gone on longer than she'd planned, that she didn't know how to stop without me noticing. I sat across from Deanna and absorbed this. "What did you tell her?" I asked. Deanna looked uncomfortable in a way that told me she had been carrying this conversation for a long time. "I told her she needed to stop immediately," she said. "I told her what she was doing was wrong. I told her she needed to tell you." "Did she stop?" Deanna was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she said. "She said she would." I believed her. I didn't ask again because I was afraid of what the answer might be. The medication had continued for at least another 6 months after Deanna's conversation with Linda. Possibly longer. The timeline was difficult to pin down precisely, because I hadn't known to track it from the beginning. I sat with what Deanna had told me for a long time after that coffee. Not anger at Deanna, I understood why she hadn't pushed further, why the alternative of demanding accountability from a friend who was clearly in crisis had felt too complicated. People make those calculations and they are rarely simple. What I sat with was the realization that someone had known, had told Linda to stop, and had watched the months continue without taking any further action. That there had been a moment, 14 months in, where the trajectory of the next 6 months of my life could have changed, and it hadn't. I don't know what I would have done differently in Deanna's position. I genuinely don't. The right answer, tell me directly, contact a doctor, refuse to let Linda rationalize her way through one more conversation, was clear in hindsight in a way it probably wasn't in the moment. She had been told something alarming by a friend she cared about. She had responded with what seemed like reasonable urgency. She had trusted the friend to follow through. The friend hadn't followed through. I think about this often because it captures something about how harm like this sustains itself, not through active conspiracy, but through a series of individually understandable decisions that add up collectively to silence. Deanna believed Linda would stop. Linda told herself she would stop and then found reasons not to. I continued to eat the food and wonder what was wrong with me. The only person who didn't have the option of choosing not to see what was happening was me, and I was the only one who didn't know what to look for. Dr. Ray's knew to run the broader panel because she was a thorough physician who treated unexplained multi-system symptoms with appropriate curiosity. That is the only reason I know what I know. If I had stayed with my previous doctor, if the insurance change hadn't happened, if Dr. Ray's had run only the standard panel, I might still be sitting with the vague, persistent sense that something was wrong with me, trying to understand why I couldn't quite reach my own life. That possibility is the one that I find most difficult to sit with when I think about all of this. Not what happened, but how close it came to never being found. I have shared my story in a limited way with a support organization that works with adults who have experienced medical coercion and non-consensual treatment. It is a smaller, more specific community than you might expect, but it exists, And the people in it understand something about what it means to have your own body used as a site of someone else's decision-making without your knowledge or agreement. Being believed in that community was something I hadn't known I needed until I experienced it. Being in a room, or on a call, as it usually was, with people who didn't need me to explain how a loving parent could do something so harmful, who understood that love and control are not mutually exclusive, and that the line between them can be invisible until it's been crossed completely, that has been part of how I have found my way back to something that feels like solid ground. I am working on forgiving my mother. Not the quick, resolving kind of forgiveness that shows up in the last paragraph of a story and makes everything feel settled. The slow, ongoing, imperfect kind that coexists with real anger and real grief and real love, all of them present simultaneously, none of them canceling the others out. Some days that feels possible. Other days the only thing I can feel is the 2 years I spent not understanding my own mind, and the particular loneliness of that, and the fury that underneath all of it was someone who loved me so much she couldn't leave me alone. I am 29 years old. I cook my own meals. I choose my own treatments. I know what my mind feels like when it belongs to me. That knowledge, which I had to lose before I understood what it meant to have it, is the thing I protect. Nobody gets to take it again.